Welcome, everybody. I'm delighted to invite you to join us for our second session of the Bloomsbury SET conference, which is focused on research translation, commercialization, and impact. We are delighted today to have two speakers joining us who are going to be bringing diverse perspectives on how you can develop an innovative environment to support translational research. So today with us we have Professor Chris Taylor, who is the Spark Academic Director at the Cardiff University Social Science Research Park, and also Hugo Villeneuve, who is the Innovation and Business Development Director at the Stevenage Bioscience Catalyst. Unfortunately, our third speaker, Colby Benari, will not be able to join us today due to ill health, but we are sure we're going to have an exciting and an engaging discussion on how we can support translational research. Just before we begin, a couple of housekeeping points, which I'm sure you're all very aware of, having been doing this for almost a year already. But as you know from the recording icon, this session is being recorded and will be available afterwards. Please do sign up for the other sessions during the conference. So we have another one this afternoon and again tomorrow and Friday. So please do join us for all of these exciting and engaging sessions on knowledge exchange. We will have presentations from Chris and Hugo to kick us off. We'll then move into a panel discussion and have plenty of time for Q&A from you, our audience members. Please do put questions throughout the presentations and we'll pick them up at the end. My internet video, unfortunately, is a little bit hit and miss at the moment, so you may find that I become a disembodied voice, but please don't let that put you off. And now, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Chris, who is our academic Spark Director at the Cardiff University Social Science Research Park. Chris, over to you.
Thanks very much, Alex, and good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. As Alex said, I'm Chris Taylor, I'm Professor in Cardiff University. I came to Cardiff 20 years ago, January the 1st. I started as a postdoc researcher, working in what is called the School of Social Sciences at Cardiff University. It's quite a unique venture in the university because we didn't have traditional disciplinary departments. The university has always had quite strong interdisciplinary schools and departments and structures. And so we had a School of Social Sciences, and my background is in educational research. So I found myself in school as somebody interested in education. My PhD had been in human geography, as it happened, and I was working alongside criminologists, social workers, educationalists, sociologists, people interested in sociology of technology and science studies, and people who worked in social policy. So a real interdisciplinary mix, and the school has grown enormously over the last 20 years. We've nearly tripled in size as a school and department. And now we have a number of world-leading research centres in the school. And about 7-8 years ago, the university decided that that success of social sciences across the whole university, not just in my School of Social Sciences, needed to be invested in beyond simply just supporting academics to do good quality research and supporting us to get external research funding. So a decision was made about 8 years ago to invest some of its capital development funds in a new social science research park, a kind of recognition that we needed to do something slightly differently in social sciences, build new partnerships and new working arrangements. And so the seed was sown really to establish this social science research park. So that's what I'm going to talk about for the next 10 minutes. The building is still under construction. It has been slightly delayed because of COVID, but we're due for completion later at the end of the summer, and then we'll be moving in winter at the end of this year. So we're less than a year away from moving in. But in preparing for the move to the building, we're already starting to work on what the activities are going to look like, what we're doing now in preparation in advance of the building. So I'm going to talk a bit about that and what we're trying to achieve. So my next slide is going to sets out the aims of the building. We're calling it Spark. Spark, S-B-A-R-C, is the Welsh translation for the word spark. And as this slide says, it's a 12,000 square metre purpose-built facility, 6 floors, has this wonderful ocular staircase running through the building at a diagonal angle from the ground floor right through to the top floor, with glass ceiling at the top, which is a kind of major feature of it. And the design of the building is kind of laid out in kind of a stack of books. That's what the architects tried to engender. But it's also been built around activity-based design of the building. So it's encouraging interactions and collaboration and, if you like, collision points within the building. So people don't sit in siloed rooms and offices through the building. Now, the building as a whole has an overall ambition, which is to create a unique cultural environment for creativity, entrepreneurship, and innovation. We also provides us with new resources for developing analytical and creative capacities. And of course, it will showcase intellectual expertise amongst the staff and students in the university. But the ultimate goal really is to undertake cutting-edge solution-oriented research, which will have greater impact than what we currently can achieve. So that's the overall aim of the building. There are 2 key parts of the building. The social science research part, which is the bit that I'm the lead for, the academic lead for, and I'm going to focus most of my presentation on the social science research part. But critically, particularly for this morning and for this session, we also have Cardiff Innovations at Spark, which is 3 floors, or nearly 3 floors, dedicated to commercial organisations. Could include social enterprise organisations, third sector organisations too, who can let and rent space within the building. So some of this includes wet labs, but it might be office space as well. And so this is lettable units, which will help with successful translation of research from within the university to particularly the commercial sector, but not exclusively, but all still with that same ambition of addressing societal challenges, which I'll talk about in a second. So the social science research park is the bit that I'm interested in, and we will occupy certainly the first 3 floors and some of the other spaces in the building too. And we're bringing together all our social science research centres across the university, and I'll go through who they are in a minute. But the idea is to bring them alongside one another, co-location, but also bringing with us not just the researchers and the research centres, but also our partners, our external non-academic partners. So we'll have a membership model, which will invite all these organisations to come in. They'll be able to rent space as well. They'll have either dedicated desks, or they can have a co-working space access, but it might just mean that they have access to the building and the facilities in it. And through that membership model, we will have them co-located with us too. So in the next slide, I'm going to outline what the Social Science Research Park is and what we include in our areas of interest and expertise. And this kind of shows quite clearly the breadth of the social science research that we do in Cardiff University and that will go into Spark. That might seem quite a challenge. At one level, it's a challenge because there's not an obvious central point of expertise that we're all coalescing around. But what we're trying to do is remove some of those disciplinary boundaries. We're trying to create a space where those silos don't really exist. We don't have to worry about university departments or college structures. We're in effect putting all this mix of all the social science research expertise we have in our centres into that space. So that gives you an idea of the breadth of it, from civil society through to adult social care, social data analysis, doctoral research training, crime and security education, public policy, and so on. The idea of bringing all those different areas of expertise together and pooling them together is that we can then support further funding, attract further funding through more innovative and interdisciplinary research. We hope to be able to engender higher quality stakeholder industrial collaboration by working with partners in Spark and also in Cardiff Innovations at Spark. Obviously, as a large group now, there'll be 800 people in this building altogether. 400 will be from the university, 400 from outside. we will find ways of contributing to civil society across the region. We have a very strong place-based approach to a lot of our social science research, and the Cardiff Capital Region, which is a major infrastructure for us, will be a key part of that. And we'll be supporting the regional economy through that activity too. And obviously we'll be benefiting our students and our graduates and our alumni in the work we do. So the Social Science Research Park in the next slide has sets out the aim and ambition for what we're trying to do. This is a community driven by expertise, creativity, curiosity, and entrepreneurship, with that sole goal of tackling complex challenges. We've seen quite recently through the pandemic how these challenges play out, but also shows how limited we have been thus to date in addressing many of those social challenges. But also the pandemic has shown us how we might have to work differently in order to address some of those challenges, but also gives us examples of where we've done things remarkably well. And we're trying to build on some of those experiences that we've learned through the pandemic. So collaboration through the co-location will be a key element, co-producing research projects with our partners. We already have a strategic research partnership with the ONS, for example, who are based in Newport. Hopefully by working with our non-academic partners, we will actually develop and improve some of our approaches to impact and how we mobilize our knowledge and expertise within the system, which may include redesigning how we go about doing our research. Also, quite importantly for me, creating a culture that allows us to challenge and encourage one another. Quite often, social scientists often engage with public debate and public policy making through very formal channels of communication, which often can mean dialogue. It often goes only one way. Very hard to obviously get policymakers to engage in public arenas and expose, if you like, their concerns about what they've already done in the past. And equally, academics are very poor at kind of acknowledging that we haven't done quite the right research that the policymakers wanted us to do, particularly in public spaces. So creating a space in the park where we can have those conversations, build trust and mutual understanding, might encourage a stronger culture for kind of having those conversations. We'll also be undertaking new cutting edge research with only resources, and it'll be obviously a key point to showcase the research that we currently do and we hope to do in the future. So the ecosystem for the Social Science Research Park involves a number of research entities. And this next slide shows you which centres are involved in the Social Science Research Park. We have, Will, you might go into the next slide for me, please. We have 11 research centres, all currently funded to large degrees from external sources. So this is building on strengths rather than, if you like, identifying areas of weakness. Sustainable Research Institute, Wizard, one of the research centres I've been working in the last 10 years, the Welsh Economic Research Unit, and so on. You can see the research centres that are making that ecosystem. But a key part, as I've mentioned before, are those external partners who will come in from outside the university, including third sector organisations, NGOs, public sector bodies, but also commercial organisations who are also interested in addressing some of these societal challenges, who may see more of a commercial value and interest in this, but nevertheless will also want to contribute to those challenges. All of this takes place within the university, so we're also looking to build links across the university. And on this slide, it's very useful because it lists all the schools in the university, colour-coded by the colleges that are represented. So we have 3 colleges in the university: the Arts, Humanities, Social Sciences, Biomedical and Life Sciences, and the Physical Sciences and Engineering. And the idea is to have a footprint of every school in the building at some point by the time we're kind of ready to move in. So we've developed, and we are developing a delivery plan and program of work for activities. And my final slide sets out a summary, if you like, of the deliverables that we're going to put together in the next year. And they're under collaboration, research, occupation, facilities, students and events. So these include all sorts of different things like the Third Sector Research Hub, a social research consultancy, an institute for interdisciplinary studies, various types of events like policy hackathons with our partners, and all sorts of things like this. And so these are the activities we'll be doing to create that kind of culture and community, working with our partners as we go forward in order to achieve our big ambitions. Thank you very much.
Chris, thank you for that excellent overview of how you're going to be building the social science ecosystem. moving along, we're going to be focusing now on the bioscience environment. And Hugo, who is the Innovation and Business Development Director at the Stevenage Bioscience Catalyst, is going to be talking us through how they do that over at the Catalyst. Over to you, Hugo.
Thanks for the introduction, Alex, and thanks everyone for joining us on this webinar. So essentially, yes, I'm Hugo. I'm the Innovation and Business Development Director at the Stevenage Bioscience Catalyst, which is a science park located in Stevenage. So on the next slide, the question today is, what are the pathways to deliver positive social, environmental, and economic impact from the knowledge generated by research? So I've added this graphic, which they showed me quite a lot during my PhD, which essentially shows that only 3.5% of PhD graduates actually stay in academic research. So the vast majority of PhD graduates actually end up either in non-university research, so in the industry, and this is in the biosciences, I want to say, or outside of research. So how can you deliver positive impact from the research that you've done during 4 or even more years as a postdoc? And how can that, how can you take that research and actually do something positive with it? And that essentially is done through translating or commercializing research, because that's a great way to actually bring the hypotheses that you've been testing all this time in your lab, and to bring that and create a product that actually benefits patients and fully benefit, from what the research that you've done. So you're actually in probably the best place in Europe to do this, because there's great support in the UK for seed to VC level startups. And that seed and VC level, essentially venture capital, is the early stage startups. So when you just have an idea and you're looking for money initially to do maybe, to get some proof of concepts and some preclinical work, as we say in the biosciences. And in 2020, despite the pandemic, you had over 1,600 deals, seed and VC deals, which is up from 2011. So again, you are in the right place to do this thing. And on the next slide, I'll show you what I mean by translating research. And essentially, the best place to translate research after you've done your PhD, or even during your PhD, because you should start thinking about that early, is go and talk to first go and talk to the PI that you have, so the principal investigator. And then you go to the university tech transfer office or accelerator programs. And these are generally the best way to actually get that research, and they'll hold your hand commercializing it. So your research itself will have different levels of readiness in terms of the kind of grants and the kind of money that you can access. So we don't really think about this generally in the biosciences, but the TRL is technology readiness level, and that's a scale used by NASA, but also used by most of the grant funding agencies like Innovate UK. And essentially, TRL 1, 2, 3, this is generally done by university research grants, which you can access. But then after that, once you've validated your technology in the lab, then it's time to think about spinning out or translating that research. And you can go for, Innovate UK grants or crowdfunding also, which is one of the ones that people don't really think about in the life sciences. And then the more traditional route is to go to angels or venture capitalists. And by angels, we mean high business individuals who are willing to put a certain amount of money in exchange for equity in your startup. So in my opinion, and in the opinion of a lot of accelerators, is that the early stage, so the really early stage startups, the beginning, it should be the lead researcher who has to be the founder, and either the CEO or CSO, because the founder is the one that's most comfortable and actually knows the technology the best. And then later on, potentially you bring in somebody who is more, who's bigger, but this is much later on actually. This is when you decide to go completely in probably TRL 7, somewhere there. But we encourage the lead researcher to be the CEO or CSO, because it's easier to actually teach business to a researcher than the other way around, teach science to a businessman. So on the next slide, I'll just show you why the Stevenage Bioscience Catalyst is one of the best places to help you commercialize and translate that research. So as I said, we're a science park, and we're a world-class cluster of excellence at the center of the Golden Triangle, right between London and Cambridge. And our mission is to accelerate translation of cutting-edge science to deliver advanced therapeutics that improve the health and quality of people's lives. So we're a globally recognized ecosystem, and we bring together academics, biotechs, and pharma. And through that, through the science part, you get access to networks in terms of finding mentors, but also finance and facilities and expertise. So we funded, so we started in 2010 with a 38 million grant from GSK, Wellcome, the BEIS, the Innovate UK, and EEDA. And we're limited by guarantee by two of the members, Wellcome and GSK. And on the next slide, I'll show you a little overview of the park. So the campus is actually located on the GSK site in Stevenage. So overall, the campus, counting GSK inside, has 4,300 employees, of which 1,000 of them are located on at the SBC, at the Stevenage Bioscience Catalyst. So we've got 3 buildings. I'm showing 2 here: the incubator, the accelerator, and then the third one, also called Spark, which is actually a manufacturing. And the organizations, so we've got 44 organizations, and they're all different. So we've got very early stage startups that are even pre-seed, so before getting the seed money, to all the way to some that are publicly listed, all the way to organizations such as the Cell and Gene Therapy Catapult, LifeArc, who's one of the biggest or most successful medical charities, Apollo Investment, which was started by 3 universities and 3 pharma, and then Cytiva Demo Lab, which is a company that shows equipment on our site, but lets our companies use their equipment for free. So currently, the buildings are full. Despite the pandemic, you might realize that the life science is actually doing quite well in terms of as a sector, because a lot of research is going into that. And it's really a testament to the cluster that we've built. And I'll show you down the next slide. And so on there, I'm just showing you exactly how you can build a successful cluster, in a sense, is that you've got 3 things: access to finance, which is one of the big things that a lot of companies in the life science need to continue to the next stage of development. Access to facilities, where with the facilities, they'll be able to develop their products and then access the finance. And then training and mentoring, which a lot of it is, being in a cluster where there's some more mature companies, some more seasoned entrepreneurs that can actually tell them what to do and what not to do. And we can see this, that, we've got access to corporate with GSK and Johnson & Johnson. So these are big pharmas. You've got the facilities provided by ourselves, but also by the Catapult, Cytiva. We've got academics working from the University of Hertfordshire and Cambridge. And then we've got a wide range of startups and scale-ups. And on the next slide, I'll show you some of the key ingredients to build a successful cluster. So the first one, right, we've talked about it, specialist facilities, but we've got different ones. So we've got the ones that are primarily for research, which is in the incubator. Then after that, your company matures and you need to start making products. So some of your products will have to be sent to clinical trials. So you need to manufacture, and that's what we provide with the Spark building. The ecosystem, we have a healthy mix of academic startups and mature companies, with academics coming with the very up-to-date hypotheses and new algorithms to use for computing something. And at the same time, startups are also generally halfway in between academia and halfway in between commercial. And the mature companies are at a later stage. And all of these kind of circle back and help each other. So access to finance, the supply chain. So because we've got a wide variety, we've got some contract research organizations that might do some service on the site for other companies, and access to suppliers and customers. So all of these work together. The location is actually quite key. So you might think that Stevenage, it's not as high it's not as, I guess, well known as London or Cambridge, but at the same time, it allows us to access both PhDs from London and Cambridge. And it's only about 30 minutes away from these places. And at the same time, once they take a hold there, they'll see that actually it's much more easy to afford a mortgage in Hertfordshire than in London when you're a scientist. Room for growth is a very key one, because the companies will mature, and so you need to be able to have facilities for them to grow. And then access to skilled employees, that comes itself. So as the campus matures, you have more and more employees that are there that might move from one company to the next, and that just comes with itself. And that scientific strength, well, we only accept companies that are working or developing IP. So they're all quite IP rich, and it is cell and gene therapy is one of the most promising and fastest growing sectors in the life sciences, and that's what the science part actually focuses on. So on the next slide, I'll show you how we support early stage entrepreneurs. One of these things is when you're starting out as an entrepreneur in the life sciences, you've got an idea, but you need lab space to be able to get funding, because investors won't necessarily give you money before you've actually proven that what you're saying actually works. So we're offering lab space for free for 6 months, 1,000 square feet, tissue culture capabilities and molecular biology capabilities. It's up to 4 startups, and we call it the Lab Hotel. And this is aimed at helping early stage entrepreneurs do their proof of concept experiment, and then be able to leverage that and get hopefully seed or later on funding. And so that's one of the ways that we're doing it. And on the next slide, I'll show you another way on how we support early stage entrepreneurs, and that's through accelerator programs. And so we've got the data program, which is Data Driven Advanced Therapeutics Accelerator. It's a quite long name, but essentially we've identified that there's this new strand of life science research that's going in, which is the AI-powered drug discovery. And a lot of people in that field, it's growing very fast because it's addressing a very big problem in pharma. But at the same time, because it's so new, people haven't yet figured out how to make a correct business model, how to actually make money as a company to be able to then go to the next step of funding. So what we do there is we take some companies and we introduce them, and we host panel talks with seasoned entrepreneurs who are in that space. We offer them mentorship, access to pharma, so that they can have one of their deals early on with saying, oh, I've got a deal with a big company, and hopefully they can leverage that for more funding. And then bring in more people to give them access to data and all these clusters that you can have. And then lastly, we teach them how to pitch in front of the industry, but also in front of investors. So whilst we don't provide funding itself, we help them access funding and better deals in the future. And just a little case study on the next slide. So this was a company called Puritify, and essentially the co-founder of Puritify, Ewan Roberts, attended a biotechnology young entrepreneur scheme, which is actually running in SBC and GSK this afternoon in 2012. And this is a competition that we've hosted in the past because it helps, again, people doing PhDs to think about commercializing some of their research. And from that, he was inspired, and in 2013, Purify spun out, backed by UCL in an Innovate UK Proof of Concept Smart Award, which means that right after that, they were able to win the One Start competition, which was hosted by SR1, which is the investment arm was the investment arm of GSK. And they managed to leverage that and get £100,000 and win 6 months of free lab space at the Stevenage Bioscience Catalyst. And just 4 years later, Puritify was acquired by a very big, large company, GE Life Sciences, which is now actually called Cytiva. And they're still there. Puritify under a different name and acquired. The team is still there. They still undergoing and still carrying out research. And this is how you take 3 people who are just PhDs to a team where they now have it. I don't know how many employees they have, but it's a lot more than 3. And so just to show you a little bit how the park has grown on the left, on the next slide, there we go. If we look at the investment that the companies, the occupier companies have received from the Stevenage Biosense Catalyst, is grown to about, in terms of cumulative equity investments, grants, and acquisition, is going to £1.6 billion as of 2020, and it just continues to grow. So I think, it is going to continue going upwards, and this is how we've supported the fantastic occupiers that we have on site. And with that, I'd like to thank you for listening to me for so long.
Wonderful. Thanks, Hugo. I think I'm almost convinced to move to Stevenage. So audience members, please do remember you can put questions into the chat box and we will respond. But while you're thinking of your questions, we're going to have a bit of a panel discussion and touch a bit more on these thoughts on building communities, because we know it's really difficult to do that, particularly across disciplines and particularly across sectors. So Chris, you started to outline a lot of the things you were thinking of doing. Could you give us a bit more detail on how you're going to bridge those gaps, particularly between academic, NGOs, and bring that community together?
Yeah, I'll start talking a bit about trying to build the community first within the university. I mean, it's not as straightforward as we think, even just to get colleagues from across different centres who actually may work in very similar areas to have conversations with one another. And I think, if anything, the working during the pandemic has kind of really highlighted how difficult that collaboration can be. So to get things going, really, is we've been working on how to bring people together from within the university first. So I'll talk about that, and then I'll talk a bit about how we're doing it external. So, for example, we've had 3 roundtable workshops over the last month, each one dedicated to a different common interest, if you like, within the building, but all with the central ambition, which is to kind of build a community and build partnership and collaboration. So one has been around the environmental sustainability of the social science research park. So just working on plans and ideas for how we make sure that our activities are as sustainable as they can be, and how we can reduce our carbon footprint, for example. And just so bringing people together, roundtable discussing ideas, people who have very strong interests and views about this, people who kind of want to be involved in something like this. And that was a really useful workshop to generate some good ideas. The second one was around our students. So what's the student offer within the building, and how do we construct that? How do we design new curriculum materials maybe for students? How do we provide extracurricular activities through the building and the activity of the park for students? So again, bringing staff and colleagues together. And I should say this is academics and professional service staff. It's not exclusively just researchers or academics, but it's bringing everybody together who's going to go into the building to talk about how they might develop activities for students. The third one is, and probably the most central one, is the social and civic mission of the building. So again, trying to bring people together to develop ideas. So for example, my ambition is that we'll have a kind of a weekly social calendar within the building of various types of events and activities going on that people can participate in, led by different people across the building. And that will become a way in which people come together in, not necessarily through professional work roles, but actually just through social and civic interests. But they may generate future research collaborations going forward. And the fourth one is research culture. So we've got a workshop coming up in a few weeks' time dedicated specifically for early career researchers, where we're going to get them to debate and discuss what would be a strong research culture for them. And these are the researchers who are going to be moving into the building. They're in many ways the core part of what we're going to have in the Spark space. So getting their ideas about how to transform the research culture of the university generally, as well as what's going inside the building, and work through ideas and initiatives to resolve some of those issues that they might have, identify opportunities for them, and make sure we build those into the design of the activities we do in the building is going to be a key part of that. So those are the kind of things we're doing internally. And then what we'll expect them to do is generate activities and processes that will then carry on as we move into the building. And then as our external colleagues come and join us, they will also then participate in those kinds of activities too. So they wouldn't become exclusively university staff only.
Great, thank you, Chris. And Hugo, maybe you could reflect on, you've got a lot of initiatives already in place, been going for a little while. What's worked well? What's really taken people forward and getting them closer to impact?
Well, I think the past year has been a bit hard in terms of actually having the nice discussions, because one of the things that I have found is that pizza is a great motivator to get people in one room, and you can't do that virtually. But at the same time, there is a lot of common interests, and so a lot of events that are targeted for these entrepreneurs, and we have events such as accessing funding, which is probably the biggest pain point, shall we say, for a lot of these companies, is how am I going to get through in next year, and how am I going to survive? And that's just the biotech funding cycle. So that's very interesting for them. But at the same time, we do have things like occupier lunches. So we have lunch that we throw every month, where all of the occupiers get to see, and then one of them presents, and then sometimes we bring in external service providers that might be useful for them, such as, hey, there's this new thing called IR35 for remote working, and things that are relevant to them. And at the same time, we've got special interest groups. So because we've got a wide breadth of companies working on different problems, and some of them are interested, for example, more in the data aspects. We've got a special interest groups on that. And then some of them are more interested in immunology, and we bring in external speakers sometimes it's internal, and the external ones might be somebody that's done something, a new technique, a new algorithm technique to look at lots of genomes at the same time. Again, I'm not in that area of research, so I'm probably oversimplifying it a little bit. But these are things that we do to encourage them. And one of these things that helps, I think, in the beginning, the park probably had a very strong community feel, and it's still there. But you'll have that as a company matures and they get big, and they go over, 150 employees. Then they get a bit more insular because they've got their own science journal clubs and these kind of things. So it's just, you have to see what works and what doesn't, and keep changing and keep breathing life, I would say, in the community, because it just changes over time, and I have to adapt.
Thank you, Hugo. I think you've both touched on this a little bit, but making the community inclusive, I think, is a key focus for everybody. Could you both comment on that a little bit? Maybe if I go back to Chris first.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are significant issues. I was only tweeting this morning about the mismatch between males and females in terms of research activity during the pandemic, and the significant impact on female academics, and how we need to come up with ways of redressing that gap that's created and emerged through the pandemic. And I'm sure it probably existed way before as well. But also with, particularly in the case of Cardiff and South Wales, Black and ethnic minority populations, and the representation of them in the research activities we do. So there's some very big issues there. So we at the moment we kind of emphasize those strands. We're trying to build in various elements to the kind of governance arrangements within Spark. So making sure we're all signed up, for example, to the Concordat for early career researchers is an obvious starting point. And the university signed up to that just before Christmas. But we need to go beyond that, in my mind. We need to find ways of enacting some of the benefits of the Concordat to ensure we have equality and diversity. One thing we're working on is a kind of research leadership program for early career researchers to develop a kind of program which you will then participate in and you work on over a period of time in cohorts of individuals. I mean, like Hugo mentioned, there's something I'm quite keen on is you've got to kind of try lots of different things, but we also have to acknowledge that some of these things may not work, they may not be successful. And so something we're trying to ensure we do is we monitor and evaluate the activities we do as we go along and do them. So we can look back, we can provide evidence to show something hasn't worked. It's pointless carrying on with things if they're not really making any difference. But equally, if things do make a difference, we need to be able to demonstrate that. So either we need to convince that we need more resources for it, or to convince others actually it's worthwhile them participating in it. So there are various kinds of things we need to do and develop and make sure we monitor and evaluate them as we go along.
And over to you, Hugo.
Yeah, I mean, yes, well, it is, that's a big problem, right? I mean, a big problem. It is a problem to a certain extent, and so we are mindful of, you know, trying to have make the same opportunities available to everyone. One of the things that has worked quite well is that we have a lot of role model with a lot of, for example, 10% of the movers. So every year in the life sciences, you've got the movers and shakers, where they assign, for example, for women that have done extremely well in the life sciences, especially in the biotech scene, they give them, they nominate, I think, 50 or 30 of them. It depends. I think this year it was 30 and last year it was 50. And for the last 2 years, we had 10% of the list coming from SBC as a Stevenage Bioscience Catalyst. So we do have a lot of role models, and I think that's one of the things that you need as when you're an early career researcher, is seeing role models that look the same as you and that are also doing some incredible things. And so we definitely do push them on. In fact, in a couple of, I think it's in March the 8th, I think, International Women's Day. So we are doing a panel on that to actually recognize the achievements that have been done by the part and encourage those things. And at the same time, we're also careful of the local. So one of these things is that Stevenage is not necessarily the most up and coming, well, it is up and coming town, I guess, but in the sense that we try to benefit the local environment. So we've had something called Generation Stevenage, which is to show to everybody in Stevenage who were like school leavers about to leave school that there are a lot of apprenticeships available at the Stevenage Bioscience Catalyst. And whilst you think that maybe R&D is only kept with PhDs, it's absolutely not true, because there's a lot of opportunities where you, for example, somebody might become a cell and gene therapy manufacturing, in the manufacturing side of things. You can have very nice apprenticeships where you get paid and you get 1 day to study on the really high level things. So these are some of these things that we're trying to show, and also trying to really impact, I guess, the local community, because we don't want to only attract people from London and Cambridge, but it's also trying to build the people locally in Hertfordshire and in Stevenage. And that's what we also try to bring.
I think, Chris, you've got something to add there. So
I think there's an interesting tension playing out in research at the moment, which is about the local versus the international or the national, and how much emphasis we place on enacting change in our local communities at the expense of, because the danger is we try and do everything and it's impossible to do everything, but at the expense of ensuring that we continue to do world-leading, globally reaching research. And I think that poses a significant challenge for the research community generally. I think particularly the social sciences. I think because I think the social sciences are moving into a new era where really, you know, we've explored and exploited as much of the kind of general theories of social research that we can, and we now need to demonstrate that those theories can be applied and have impact on the ground. And I think that often requires taking those theories into communities, into practice and into policy. So it changes the focus a bit. But by doing that, of course, we might not then be writing publications for academic peer-reviewed journals. You know, these are trade-offs. And I think the impact agenda in REF, for example, has really highlighted that everyone wants everyone wants us to do everything now. And there's a point when you kind of have to go, well, some things now have to be at the expense of other things, and we have to kind of reassess what the landscape looks like for the research community and how we're judged and evaluated and how we're monitored and performed and what we're expected of us, but where we actually ultimately do good for society, because that's ultimately the only reason we're here.
Absolutely.
Thank you for those reflections, Chris. And I guess that takes us to another point. I'm just going to remind audience members, thank you for all those questions coming in, but please do keep them coming. We'll be picking them up later on. So thinking about, priorities, those competing priorities. For an early career researcher coming into this, be they, straight from school, be they an undergraduate, a PhD student, or a postdoc, how can we support them to really, understand the different routes that there are to impact and see how they can take their ideas forward to creating that impact? What support structures do you think are important to do that? And that's for both Chris and Hugo.
Okay. Well, that's personally, not necessarily at the Stevenage Bioscience Catalyst, but I have done a lot of, because I'm actually recently, it was last year that I was finishing my PhD. So I am quite familiar with this sort of angst where it comes to an end and you're like, what's next? So I've done quite now a few careers talk, because that was one of the things that I found was actually lacking, was telling, when you're doing a PhD and a lot of research, you're just focused on your research and you're not really thinking about the next steps. And that's something that I saw in my peers a lot of the time. So with whilst I had an opportunity to work with a startup during my PhD for 3 months, Cluster Market. And from there, we founded the Science Entrepreneur Club, which is a community, in fact, of actually, it's based in London with a lot of PhDs and even people doing their master's research. And we're just showing them, look, these are the different things that you can do right after. If you're passionate and you've got some pieces and you like writing, but you don't like writing grant applications all the time, you can become a medical science writer. And we've got some people connected in our network who've done a PhD and who've done that and who transitioned there. We also have people who didn't do a PhD. So we're not just limited to PhDs. But also it's about mapping out what's out there, because I personally, I like the careers talks from the universities, but they're not as good as it can be. And that's what I found personally. And I found also that the people weren't really personable sometimes, because they had spent too long. And I saw we had invited this high-flying lawyer telling us, hey, you can do this. But she had like 15 years of experience in the field. And I just thought, I'm never going to be able to achieve that. So with the Science Entrepreneur Club, we bring in people who have recently graduated and who have recently gone into other things. And they're like, this is you. This is what you can be in 2 years. And this is where you can go. And here are the things. And we've also compiled a sheets of all the different accelerators and help that you can get in the UK if you want to, because it's Entrepreneur Club, right? Where you can take those ideas. So these are some of the things that I've done outside of the Stevenage Bioscience Catalyst to address that problem.
Yeah, Alex, I thought it was a really good question. Given my point earlier about the tensions that there are now in terms of the competing demands placed on research community and what we're trying to do, the real danger is we also place those challenges upon our early career and junior kind of colleagues. And I think that's a mistake. My general view is that there are core knowledge and skills and expertise that one needs to develop and be encouraged to develop. These are building blocks. I have a long-term view of training capacity building needs that we all ought to be engaged in that activity throughout our lives. But there needs to be some sort of structure to it. So an early career researcher, for example, needs to focus their attention around key elements of what they do, not least kind of writing for publication, doing good quality research, learning about methods and skills. My feeling then is that there are then things to be done later in your career, and that's when you start getting exposed to those sorts of things. Now, that's not to say that they should be involved in impact. What I mean by that is you need to say you don't need to do everything. You should focus and concentrate your efforts around the things that motivate you. And I'm a big believer in motivation as being a key element in what we do as researchers. And if we're not motivated, and I see a lot of academic colleagues of various grades in my life where they have lost motivation. They're doing things because they have to do them. They're doing them because that's what they had to do last year. And they've lost the kind of the stimulation, the idea, and the the exploratory idea that they want to kind of reveal something or identify something or explore something, and that's kind of lost, and that's the one thing we can't afford to lose. So I would say they're the things you need to develop as a junior career researcher, is understanding what motivates you, how to go and then exploit that and seek it. Now, if that is an area of impact and knowledge mobilization and transfer and translational research, absolutely brilliant. But you do that. That's what you do first. You don't then worry about doing all the other things that you might be required to do. That will come in time. And this is like building blocks to build your career. I know we know this from school curriculum. I mean, we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. People have to learn in structured ways in order to become good scholars. And we need to be very clear about what's expected and what those building blocks are and when's the right time to do various things, I think.
Yeah, I have maybe like a few things to add from the perspective of a life science researcher, and that might be just my field essentially, but I would say also, and this is probably a key advice to anybody who wants to do entrepreneur or even like thinking, maybe just have a seed of thought in terms of that, is to, as a scientist, you do need to do some skills that are, or think to have at least some skills that are that you can translate later on. Because if you spend all your time learning cryo-EM and you learn how to use a very expensive microscope, but that's all you know how to do, then later on, if there aren't any, if it's oversaturated, which it is, there's a lot of people graduating with those kind of competences, then you're going to, and you will definitely, as you will find in your research, especially towards the end, you will actually be in a, 50% of my peers were in very bad mental stages by the end of the PhD. It was a lot of ups and downs, shall we say. When you have your identity crisis, you need to be able to feel safe that you have other avenues rather than just being cornered into one little area. That is my personal take, and I have seen that with other some of my peers on that one, where they felt maybe a bit over specialized. And yes, I can work on those really cool, expensive machines, but the real world doesn't actually need you to learn how to do these things. It's only specific for that strand of research.
And actually, Hugo, I'm going to jump to a question from the audience here because it follows on very nicely from that. And it's, how do we convince early career researchers that there's actually a genuine demand for their skills, that they're actually going to have a job at the end of the day, when we know that there's almost an oversupply of PhD qualified graduates at the moment, particularly in the life sciences?
Chris, do you want to? Oh, in the life sciences, okay. Well, I can answer it quickly. It's that I can't give you the certainty. That's for sure. But the thing is that people do value PhDs quite a bit, because it shows that you can do a lot of hard work and that you can know a lot of things. So a lot of outside the real world, if you're looking at outside of science completely, they will value those things. They definitely will value PhDs. Now, it is true, and you can't lie about that it is oversaturated, and there's going to be a glut of PhDs on the market. The more and more we continue, it's going to become the new masters. Again, my personal view on that. And I actually think that you should think about other things that interest you, and you shouldn't just hedge all your bets on the science, because science, as we know, 90% of the experiments you will do in a lab will probably fail. Only 10% will be successful. And so it's possible. Just do some things on the side. If you're interested in innovation and commercializing and doing entrepreneurship, we've got some great clubs, some pre-accelerators that you can join and be part of it. I mean, I was the president of the Innovation Forum London branch, and we were selecting early stage startups to go through the next funding stages. And one of the cool things about being a life science scientist is that you have this incredible wealth of knowledge, and there's all these investors that don't really know. They've got a lot of money, but they don't know where to invest. And so position your way in such a way that you are the person giving advice to these investors of where to invest. There's a lot of interesting things, because then you'll see, oh, wow, this idea just came on. There's like this incredible science. And then you get to network. I think that the last thing I'll say is, for any jobs and for all these kind of things, networking. So if you do more activities than just pure research, and you do, hey, maybe after 5 p.m., instead of running one more experiment, which might fail, I do, and I join up with people who are doing these kind of things, and you expand your network. When your network will be expanded, guaranteed, you'll find a job straight after.
Thank you for those reflections, Hugo. And maybe if I go to Chris from the social science perspective.
Yeah, I mean, the same issues of oversupply of doctoral students resonates in the social sciences too, and I think there is a concern that there might be an oversupply. I'm not entirely convinced. I mean, there needs to be some evidence to persuade me otherwise, but certainly when it comes to people competing for jobs, it seems to be getting harder for people to try and get those jobs. Now, one thing I think we will try and do in Spark to help with that is encouraging much greater kind of secondments across different sectors. So, we already have a very successful doctoral training program in Cardiff where many of our students will go on internships or secondments during their PhDs, maybe 3 months or 6 months in some cases. Now, and they're funded. Now, the key thing for me is to carry that forward as you move into becoming an early career researcher. And of course, it's a real challenge because if you're externally funded by a research council grant, usually you might have 2 years to complete the research task. So the idea of being able to take a secondment during your postdoc is really limited because at the end of the day, the PI and the funder want the job done. And whilst that's good for you, you've got a 2-year contract, it will generate publications. It doesn't really help you broaden your reach in terms of your other opportunities and your career opportunities. If anything, it might actually even narrow it because you get you get known as being the researcher on that project, and you don't think about your wider contribution to the community, both inside the academia or outside. So try and find ways of kind of releasing researchers to have secondments during research contracts is going to be a key thing that we're going to try and achieve in Spark. Now that might require us having additional resource to facilitate that, but we also need a kind of culture within the place where PIs would be comfortable with their researcher who they've employed for 2 years on a particular task to be able to take a month or two to go and work with an external organization. And in the meantime, we can backfill the research activity for them with other researchers. And I suppose in the life sciences, of course, you work in laboratories. So to some extent, that kind of happens anyway. In the social sciences, where researchers are funded in siloed projects, the opportunities are much rarer, actually. So I think actually it's probably even worse for us. But we're trying to create a kind of laboratory approach to this. So we have teams rather than individuals working on projects, so that you can then move workloads around to allow people to release them to go and experience other things, maybe spend time with a public sector organisation, the Welsh Government, for example. Many of our staff go and work with them on secondments, just to give them an opportunity to think about how they might utilise their skills and expertise in other ways other than an academic way. And quite often, many people prefer to do something like that, where they're fully engaged on the ground, delivering something, rather than going back to being an academic where for most of the time they're going to be lecturing to future students, which is not what they were thinking their career was going to be like as a researcher.
There are there is and this is where I did my PhD, the London Interdisciplinary Doctoral Trainingship, I think. They offer 3 months, so they actually view, and this is why I actually took the graphic from with 3.5% of PhD stay in academia, is actually, this is the first thing they tell us. And they have on it, they've got a 3 months internship that you can do with a startup of your choice, which again, you have to network to find. And if there is something that's it has to be completely unrelated to your research. And we get those opportunities. So I think in the life sciences, it is changing a little bit because people are recognizing that, yes, most of us won't actually stay in academia. And we need to have the skills to go out in the real world, so to say, after. And that did give me, I think, the first flavor of looking outside of just science.
And back to Chris, I can see
the reverse of this is also true, we ought not to remember, and that is to bring people from outside the academia and outside universities to come in, also on short-term placements and secondments, for example, so they can understand this side of it too. And I think there's some real opportunities there, particularly around the knowledge translation and knowledge mobilization areas of our work, where by having them co-located with us within our teams, where they have a particular role in thinking about how does this research get translated into real kind of enactment, that's where their skills and expertise are really valuable. And whilst they're doing that, they're learning about the research activities that researchers do in the universities and how the universities work and how it's organized, and some of the constraints we are placed under in terms of how we go about doing what we do. And I think that flow of movement between various entities and organizations and sectors is really quite, I think that would be the new way of working as we go forward. And of course, it's this idea that people don't have a single career now. It's that, they try lots of different things throughout their career and they might move around quite a lot. But what we need to retain is some sense of security in doing that. It's no good just offering and saying, this is what we want, and then saying, okay, everyone's now got 1-year contracts. That's just not going to work either. So we need to find ways of securing long-term placements. People can be seconded back, knowing full well that they're going to get a job when they come back to the organization that they've left. And I think that's quite critical.
And I think you've almost answered this, Chris, but I'm going to ask it a bit more explicitly. Do you think we are now becoming more used to that sort of more porous nature of moving between sectors, but from academia to an NGO or to an SME and then back again? Is that becoming the new norm?
I don't think we're anywhere near it. I mean, there are examples of people who have done that, and there will be many who have done it, but certainly it is not the norm. And that's why I think we do need to set different parameters and expectations for how people might want to work and the benefits of it, and how it might help contribute to your motivations about your research ideas, how it might develop your skills and expertise, your networks, and as I say, to show that it's not going to become a barrier to your future career. Because I think at the moment we don't have the infrastructure in place to allow it to work successfully, for it to become the norm. And I think if it was to be the norm now, we would be causing lots of problems actually. So we need to build an infrastructure around this, then encourage it, and then it might become the new norm going forward. But my point would be, I think this is what's now required in order to progress the way we work.
It would be, it would be great. I don't, it's very rare also in the life sciences, having seen that, because essentially if you step out of academia, you haven't published in a while, everything is linked to your impact factor. Coming back in, unless you've done a brilliant company that has revolutionized the way we think about things, and you're unlikely to come back to an academic position. And that's just, unfortunately, how we think about things. I mean, we don't even need to go into like impact factors and whether these are truly the way publishing, but yeah, we're not there yet in the life sciences.
I think impact factors might be a whole different debate that we can take on another time. So audience members, do keep those questions coming. I'm going to jump to one at the moment. So you've both indicated that there's an interdisciplinary approach is important for tackling those grand challenges. But do the funders actually want that, and how can we make them sort of reflect that need to have that interdisciplinarity? So, for example, how can UKRI or other funders encourage that cross-discipline working when offering larger grants?
I certainly think, I mean, the creation of UKRI has probably made a significant difference in this world. So certainly much more collaboration across research funding councils, for example, in research activities. I'm involved in one on which is a collaboration between the MRC, AHRC and ESRC on adolescence and mental health and well-being. So a coming together and a real interest in pursuing a particular kind of interdisciplinary approach to that particular challenge. And so I think from a funder's perspective, I think that is happening. I suppose what my reflection on this is that I'm always still surprised that then when we get the grants back in from academics, that they have the appearance of interdisciplinarity or transdisciplinarity on the surface. But in terms of the way they construct the teams and the organization and the way in which people work together, they still are dominated by particular disciplinary approaches and disciplinary leads. Now, that might reflect something about the amount of resource available. So maybe the point is interdisciplinarity costs more, And in order to, and we have to kind of make it look like interdisciplinary, but we've still got the same cost base. So we're kind of constrained in that way. That might be an explanation. Secondly, I think that there's still an important conversation to be had, particularly with the social sciences, because lots of colleagues in medical and physical and engineering sciences have a strong expertise in a particular kind of area, and then they think that they can just apply it in a social setting as though that is a straightforward challenge. And a good example of that is taking clinical ideas about mental health and applying them into a school setting. If you don't understand educational processes, that research is just not going to land very well. And it's no good just simply taking a study where you go, okay, we're going to work with schools and we're going to work with teachers, without really understanding the diversity of schools that are around. So how do you even choose the sampling frame for a study like that without really understanding those differences? B, understanding how teachers work and what their priorities are, and how their professional development systems are in place to support them in developing new skills to enact something that you might be trying to introduce. And thirdly, how children themselves understand and think about schools as sites of activity, and how they think that schools are there to help them with their well-being. That's not how they approach it. So, if you don't have that understanding, then those projects, which might very easily look like they're interdisciplinary because they're located in a social setting, don't really understand the theories that apply in those social settings to use in their research. And so I think we're kind of guilty of this ourselves. I still think we're being short-sighted. We've not seen the full opportunities. And I think we've mentioned ref impact case studies, but we could talk about ref submissions generally, and the siloing of departments still, the difficulty of still teaching in traditional degrees. We've still not really broken out of some of those silos inside the universities. And I think as a result, we're not very good ourselves at coming up with good strategies for interdisciplinarity. We can talk about it, but we don't enact it. I don't think the funders the issue then. I think the parameters and the landscape around us, the constraints that are imposed upon us, which may come from outside the university, ref is a good example, may still kind of reinforce those disciplinary silos, which stop us from really investing in our time and effort to kind of take that forward. But I do recognise that the resource base required for this is probably much greater than people originally expected.
Hugo,
Yeah.
do you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I mean, in the life sciences, it's more and more pushed, this interdisciplinary approach, I would say, and that's the thing that I think it's in the name of the doctoral program that I came out, London Interdisciplinary Doctoral Program. So you'll have things like, I mean, it's obviously all STEM, and like in the sense that, fine, it's data analytics in biology, and learning about how to code as a biologist, which are they're quite useful at that level. But at the same time, you'll see, for example, in SVC, the reason why do we have in our cluster, why do we have consultants? Because you don't have all the expertise, and you don't need to have all the expertise in your company. In fact, you will, as a biotech, as an entrepreneur, you will need to outsource some of these things. It's better to actually do that rather than trying to do everything and doing it halfway, rather than just outsourcing it to a consultant in drug discovery who might just be much better placed than you at knowing how to take that drug forward and can help you with that for a fee, obviously, or a different way of working. There are different ways on how you work these things out. So yeah, at the academic level, it is pushed. I'm not so it's pushed the interdisciplinary from the PhD angle. It's nice to have it, but they only do it in the beginning, in the first year, to teach you all these coding and all that stuff. And then by the end, I forgot everything, and I've focused in on what my PhD was on. So I'm not entirely convinced if it does really impact as well as it could. Maybe there needs to be a way on how to rethink it, and maybe actually have it embedded throughout your PhD.
And do you think you run the risk of reviewers thinking that you might be sacrificing depth in one discipline by going, with a broader landscape, by cutting across those disciplines? Is that something that either of you have come across?
Yeah, I mean, that would be a real concern if you were the bidder and the PI on the project, and you do worry about that. And there is an element of that in reviewers' minds. I suspect I've sat on interdisciplinary panels where there's somebody from every discipline across the social sciences sat around the table deciding on everybody's research grant applications, and the disciplinary differences within the sector are played out in that room. I mean, they really are. I mean, the kind of hierarchies of expertise and how people think certain things are more, and that's just within the social sciences. So this is incredibly challenging. But at the end of the day, those people making those decisions are us. And I always get frustrated when people say, "Oh, the research council, they don't know what they're doing, or they don't know how to review things properly." And I just keep reminding everybody, they are us. We are that community. And if we are unsatisfied, then we need to look at ourselves about how we, if you like, train each other, advise each other, and guide each other about how we should interpret and reflect on what's important when judging a research grant, for example. So my view is that as long as there is enough, there is a theoretical. I mean, there are so many theories in social sciences, right? That you could have 20 different theories in one project, and I don't think that makes it for a stronger project. Sometimes I think as long as you've chosen the most, a bit like method, as long as you've chosen the most appropriate theory, and you've been able to demonstrate you understand it, then that's what you need to include in the project. So that requires only one theory from each of those disciplines. But as long as you can demonstrate very clearly that you understand it and you've chosen them very carefully, and that is the most appropriate theories to bring to it, the application at the end of the day can only be held up to account against what you've included in that thing. So, you haven't got space to put 30 theories in from every discipline in the study. So I have a very different approach to reviewing those. As a result, I say as long as there's something there, it ticks that box for me, and I think, yeah, okay, those researchers are going to take that on board, and as long as they do that with all these other ones, that's fantastic. I don't worry too much about the depth, but there's got to be that key theory there to make sure they understand it, and it's not lip service to kind of the interdisciplinarity I mentioned before.
Thanks, Chris. Hugo, anything to add on that point?
No, I mean, I think there's like a fine line to toe between, I guess, being interdisciplinary and then doing it for the sake of doing it, and that at the end of the day, it's your judgment call when you make that grant application, and you never know how it's going to turn out until you're successful or not, or you can have an idea, but that's what I would say for these things, and at SBC on the more commercial side. I mean, at the end of the day, it's whether you get the result that will make your investors believe in you and come back with more funding, so you can go to the next stage of development. And it doesn't really matter as long as you are able to do it within the money that you have allocated to you currently, and you're able to get that result. That's how I would say it works.
Thanks, Hugo. And just jumping to another audience question, we've been asked if you could both comment on the value of mentoring for early career researchers, and what qualities those early career researchers should be seeking when they try and find a mentor.
Well, first of all, we have a mentoring scheme in Cardiff University, and we have mentoring systems set up for our research staff in the centres, and certainly something that SPART will be encouraging. So you've got to have a system, and you've got to encourage staff to make use of it. I think sometimes you don't. I mean, I've only recently been thinking about my mentor and who I want to mentor me for the next few years, because I've got this new role. It's a new opportunity to rethink about what I need, what I need to develop in my own ability and skills. And so I know full well that sometimes you sit there looking at a list of names and just think, well, how do I choose somebody who's a mentor? And so sometimes this isn't easy at all, and you have to just kind of accept that you might make mistakes in choosing mentors, and you just kind of have to go around the houses a little bit. But if you're at the beginning of your career, of course, you haven't got time to afford to spend doing that. So you need to speak to other people, and that's where my role as a PI or a line manager for somebody who's seeking a mentor is really critical. So I'm often sitting there and I would ask them, say, okay, so I would do the role of being that facilitator. what do you think you might want to get from a mentor? I will then say what I think also you might benefit from a mentor in terms of your background, your experience, your personality style, and then I will try and match them to somebody who I think will suit them. It's not giving the onus on them, and that's my job as the line manager to find a suitable mentor for those staff I have. Otherwise, it's incredibly difficult. We used to have a really good coaching system in the university, which would coach mentors, and it was really successful. But it's very hard to find evidence to support its further funding or investment. It seems so incidental, really, to the bigger process of line management. But these are very important elements, and I wonder sometimes if we've neglected just keeping those things in check and supporting the mentors as well as the mentees. We have something called Academy Wales, which we're very fortunate to have. It's just a public sector kind of organisation which supports the development of all public sector leaders in Wales, and it's a great role. It's a national thing. We pull everybody together. People participate in winter schools and summer schools. People then go on and become mentors to one another. Anybody's willing to give up their time. There's a real sense of kind of a voluntary spirit about it, which is a great resource. And we need to kind of just reuse that approach in everything we do. But you need to have a right mindset for it too. I've had many staff who they say, yeah, I'll have a mentor, and then they don't really use it or use them. And we've got to learn about how we encourage that right mindset so that they see it as valuable and how they're going to use it.
Yeah. Well, yes. So I mean, mentorship is incredibly valuable. I'll speak about it from the SBC perspective, and then I can skip over to the academic perspective a little bit after. The SBC perspective, when you're an entrepreneur, every entrepreneur has had mentors, whether they admit it or not. And so we offer a mentorship program through the accelerator that we're offering. And a lot of these things is that you can't really force somebody to become a mentor. So we organize a meeting session where they meet, and then they can continue talking. And if it takes off, it takes off. Because you can't, it's a bit hard to tell somebody who's wants to be a mentor that they have to stick with that mentee, I guess, the person that needs to be mentored. And so it's a bit hard to force those things, because then both people don't like it, because it doesn't suit their, for different reasons. Half of the time it's personality reasons. And that's just, and so that's one of these things that we offer. And also we have CEO lunches, where, because we've got a wide breadth of companies. So for the early stage companies, generally the CEO will be an early career researcher. It's going to be 27, 28. And then you've got the later stage companies where, much more seasoned entrepreneurs who will then voluntarily give those pieces of advice, and then mentors and mentees will come out of that. And these pairs just naturally, you don't have to force it. And then from an academic perspective, when I was in university, we did have a mentorship. So we had two systems. We had the academic mentorship, and then we had the buddy kind of system with some PhD that was 2 years above you. None of these really worked, again, because for me it was forced. So it's not, I didn't necessarily get on well. Not get on well, but it's just there was no feeling. And instead, I did have several other mentors, people that I've regarded as my mentors, that I met through networking, where I continued the conversation. And I worked also during my research. I met somebody in a startup who started his own startup, and he helped me out when I was trying to fundraise in Boston. These kind of things were essentially to meeting people and meeting interesting people at networking. So you have to put yourself out there, obviously. But once you get over that, you'll meet some incredible people. And as I said, most of these people are really happy to mentor because they didn't get there by themselves. They had mentors themselves.
This is a good example of when, if you're on an ongoing contract where you're not worried about your future career as much as others, you build strong working relationships with people, and choosing who you work with comes sometimes quite naturally. But you can't underestimate the importance of who you work with in terms of that support, mutual understanding, mutual encouragement, and also helping you out when you really need it. And so that's very easy for me to say, because I have that. I've had that for most of my career. But if I was in if I'm in a fixed term contract position where people aren't necessarily going to invest their time in working in collaboration with you, I think that's when mentoring becomes really important. And it would be nice to imagine a scenario where we don't really have to have a mentoring system, because in effect, mentoring just takes place in so many ways. Everyone mentors one another. We work in a community of practice, which is supportive and encouraging. And I think that's what I would ultimately like to achieve with Spark, where we have that, where you wouldn't need to have a designated mentor. Now, at the moment, we do, because otherwise you just sat in your office with your line manager, with maybe one or two other researchers, but not a very wide team at all. And you don't get exposed to other people's skills and expertise. And so it's important you get an external voice to come into that small world, to challenge, to critique, and support you. So I think mentoring system is needed in that situation, but it would be great to move out of that box and that room in order for not to have the mentoring system in place. It would be a wonderful opportunity where it just happens more organically, more naturally, because you're just working in a much bigger team of supportive colleagues.
Thank you, Chris and Hugo. So we've had a question about capacity strengthening, I guess. So what advice would you give to an international NGO based in the UK, working on a particular disease with a research lab, clinical and social services in rural India, but with weak academic research capacity? So what would be the first steps in cooperation with biomed, social and mental health researchers? So I guess about building those networks.
Well, from my perspective, one thing we're trying to set up in Spark is a third sector research hub. So this is a way of supporting third sector organisations in their research activities. Now, there are various research volunteering schemes in the UK already. The Royal Statistical Society offers a pro bono scheme where their members provide statistical support to third sector organisations. But what we've learned from those examples is that quite a lot of the time, these organisations start from not really knowing what they need, and they don't know kind of how research will help support their activities. So I think we need something more general than that, and that's what I'm hoping that Spark's Third Sector Research Hub can do. Certainly starting within Wales, but potentially that could be expanded elsewhere, and other universities could participate in a similar scheme, where we kind of release people in our teams to spend time with organisations just discussing research questions and what research can do and how it can offer and support you. Not even getting to the point yet where you might go, okay, let's do some research. That's way down the line for me. I think we've got to have those initial conversations. But the idea is we have a pro bono scheme set up, which then, from our point of view, releases our time. We might have a time credit system in place where people will get something back in return for having donated their time, volunteered their time to participate and support organisations. Keep the contributions fairly tight to a relatively small number of hours, so it's manageable. It's not overtly pressure, so there's clear expectations. But actually, by us having people in the building and in the park, those NGOs, we will actually be able to work with them on a kind of daily basis in a very informal way, which will support them. So you don't really need even a scheme like the pro bono scheme. So it will kind of happen more naturally, and hopefully we'll bring them into our membership like that, and we can support them on an ongoing long-term basis. Whether they're international or based in Cardiff, it doesn't really matter.
And that sounds like a fantastic resource that will be developing in that hub. Hugo, anything to add to that?
It's a bit of a tough question. So it's for an NGO to reach out to biomed academics, was that? Yeah. So I'm not aware of any schemes per se, but I mean, how I would approach it is, if you see some interesting research, just look at the author list of these papers and send them an email. Half of the time people actually reply because they're interested about people talking to their research, and you can reach out to them. So you've got academic Twitter, which is very active, but you can also reach out to them via email and then see where that leads, because there might be a collaboration that they're aware of that you might not be, and then find a way on how to collaborate with you going forward. So So that's how I would do it.
Yeah, I mean, the university's invested a lot of resource in research support within universities, which is often geared around supporting those inside the university to do research. What we've perhaps not done is put in place those support services to, if you like, work with how externals work with us. Now, we're going to trial. Well, we're going to have a community manager for the Social Science Research Park, whose responsibility is to kind of work with those organisations, with the researchers. So, you know, it can broker that relationship. They can spend, and there's a resource and expertise there to develop it. But we recognise that's a unique role within our university. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out and what skills we really need to make that community manager successful. And, you know, again, a bit of trial and error here in terms of just trying something and seeing how it goes. But we've seen a couple of examples elsewhere of key roles. We see it in business parks all the time, and so science parks, they have, you know, business liaison officers who do this kind of work, but not on the research side, not in kind of bringing research communities together, whether it be from the NGO and the academic community.
Sounds like we'll have to invite you back, Chris, to hear what happens in a couple of
Yes.
So I'm aware we've just got 3 minutes left for our session. So audience members, please do put any burning questions in the chat. And while you're thinking of your last questions, I'm going to ask our panelists, what are your thoughts on the future? So obviously we've been working in a new world for the last year. We've transitioned to remote learning, virtual networking. How is this going to look in the next sort of 5 to 10 years? Where are we going with this in terms of translation, impact, commercialization?
Well, I mean, until we fully automate and we can have little robots going in the lab doing everything, I think that's we're still going to be there in the future, and we'll still allow people to come in, and that's what we've done, in fact, because during the pandemic we've stayed open for our scientists, for the occupied company scientists to come in, because some of them are doing clinical trials at the moment, and if we stop them coming in, then there would be people who actually maybe not make it because they're waiting on a treatment from coming from the science park. So for that, it's always going to be the same, but for office work, you might have a flexible, so for people that are mostly office-based, which is, I guess, people working in the data sciences, and you already see that to some extent, because half of them are coming from a computer science background where they're used to remote working anyways. So I think that's probably going to continue, or at least be a bit more flexible, and yeah, that's how I see at least the future. But I don't think it will change. I don't think we'll have a drastic change. And I think science parks will always have their place. We might have one thing that we might put in place is the hot desking, and there might be different things where that, depending on how health and safety, how we evolve with the COVID, that I'm not sure how we're going to go with that forward. But you know, who knows?
Yeah, in the social sciences and in Spark particularly, I mean, everything we do is person-centric. So, you know, collaboration, communication, social interactions are really central to what we do. And we've learned that writing a journal article in an internationally leading journal doesn't lead to impact. You've got to have that conversation with the policymaker as well, or the practitioner as well. So those kind of interactions are really important to what we do. So I am nervous. You know, many of us have been nervous about what this is going to, you know, what the outcome of the pandemic is going to have on working practices, and particularly in the social science research part, where it's designed around collision and connectivity and collaboration. So we've been monitoring very carefully. You know, we've been surveying staff last summer. We'll probably do it again the same this summer. Look at what people's attitudes towards working in the building is going to be, how it's changed, what their expectations are going forward. I think there's a lot of people, and the evidence from our research shows that there's a very big divide. Actually, there's half of the groups and colleagues are very keen to kind of stay remote working. You know, there's no doubt about it. They've bought into it, they've liked it, and they want to do more of it. Then there's the other half who are desperate to get back to kind of seeing people face to face. And on balance, you might go, well, that's okay, that's fine. Everyone can do what they want in those two situations. But the danger is we're kind of creating two new silos. Exactly the thing I was trying to avoid in the social science research park. And so I'm not going to let that happen, so I think it's a key thing is to recognize what the value of some of the virtual activity brings to our work. Events like this, we could be running really easily because they are so easy to put together in some respects. People can come from all over the world to participate in them. We can record them, we can put them on the websites later, and they're a great way of sharing ideas and having conversations. But we need to complement that with something else, more interactive, more face-to-face. So I think we just need to be a bit more kind of division of activity, really, in terms of what is online and what's face-to-face, and being clear about that. And I think colleagues in Spark will spend more time at home, there's no doubt about it. But when they come in, we're going to make the most of it. And we need to think about what that's going to look like and what it's going to be and how we're going to benefit from it. The other thing we're going to try and encourage in Wales is regional working hubs. The Welsh Government are very keen on this, to reduce commuting, which is a key thing. So people might not come into their office, but they might go and work in a community working hub somewhere else. And Spark will become like one of those community hubs. People will work from our place instead of having to go into their organisation in Newport or Bristol or in Caerphilly, for example. And I think that's a new way of working. That doesn't mean people lose connectivity, just means we'll have slightly different networks and connections. And I think that will be a good thing.
I think, well, there is one thing that I've noticed over the pandemic that isn't the same, is the networking aspect. And that you can't, it is very hard to have, on the 50-person Zoom call, to be able to talk to one person only. And that is something that's actually sorely missing. So those types of, I've seen some platforms like Remo and different platforms where you can shift and have those conversations, but it's still not exactly where I'd like it to be. And I think a lot of things, collaborations, ideas come out of those networking events, essentially. Let's see, hopefully once we all have the jab and there's no second or third strain of new COVID coming out. Well, let's see, fingers crossed. I can't predict that one.
Thank you, Hugo and Chris. We've just got one last question I'm going to try and fit in, even though we're a couple of minutes over time. So do you have any sort of last top tips for a PhD student who is hoping to develop a product during their PhD that they'd like to commercialize? You've highlighted a lot of different routes. What would be your one top tip for them to help them on this pathway?
Don't be afraid to seek help. And that's just about reaching out to people. And sometimes reaching out to people you don't know, because you actually never know what comes out of these things. And then you can take, for example, some people reached out to me on LinkedIn and then continued giving them advice on how I would have done it and how I tried to do it back in the days, maybe a year ago. And that's, I think, seeking help is one of these things, especially because you don't necessarily have all that tool set as a graduate, and there's people who have done these things, but with the caveat that you do not reveal, you just to be careful in terms of confidentiality. You don't want to blow your patent or IP away. So do it in such a way where you're asking help, but you're not being naive either, because that can happen.
Yeah, I can only add that you can't do this on your own. And that's Hugo's point, really. And actually, most universities and organizations have staff in place to support that process who have much greater expertise than necessarily the people sat in the office next to you. So you need to reach out a bit, perhaps further than your networks would have gone currently allow you to, and seek that advice and support, really. But the key thing is there are lots of commercial organizations who are also there to support you, who are not interested in the IP of the product, but are there to help facilitate and encourage you. And again, universities should a pretty strong position now to help support that activity.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Hugo. You have been fantastic panelists and taken us on a journey of community building, mentoring, resilience, and crossing sectors. So thank you for your thoughts, your reflections, and taking the time to be with us today. We're going to close this session now with a reminder to audience members that we have another conference session starting at 2 p.m. So you've just got enough time to run and get some lunch if you're in the UK time zone. And this afternoon's session is on funding interdisciplinary global health research. So there'll be some excellent speakers again to hear from. So just one more thank you to Hugo and Chris, and thank you to our audience members, and goodbye.
Thank you, Alex.